Buonasera, good evening, ciao a tutti. This is Marcello Marcello Cordovani from Vitor, Italy with the Italians. I'm so glad I'm back here with our tales about Italy, about the history of Italy, and some notes about what's going on here. And I hope that you are enjoying it. And I remember you that we do have some more initiatives going on with our podcast, Italy and Extraordinary History, and also with our talks about Italy, which is going to take place next Monday. Okay, next Monday, same time. I'll be on Google Meet if you want to meet me in person, and we can talk eye to eye and face to face, and we can talk about anything you want. Just notes about Italy, the history, or current events, what's going on here, how you can organize a tour, what would you like to see. Many things. So this meeting that we are having next Monday is really open to any topic, any item that you want to touch, and I'll answer as far as I can, the best I can to all your questions. So thank you very much once again for being here. Let me take a few seconds to say hello to a couple of friends. First of all, Russell and Kathy in Scottsdale, Arizona. I met them a couple of years ago, and I still remember you with love. And a special thanks to Dana, who made a very nice comment on episode 8 last 2 weeks. Okay. It's time to go on, and what's going on? You know, if anybody of you has followed the previous episodes, you know that we are talking about a few minutes. We are talking about what's going on here and our initiatives. Now we'll talk about our initiatives. But first of all, let me talk about what's going on here. We have opened once again. The country is open once again from last Monday, April the 26th, after a lot of debate about let's open, no, it's too early, no, we have to open, and so on. So the government finally decided to have the restaurants and other activities open to the public. And this is also due to the fact that the vaccination program is going very well. Only a few weeks ago, we had a gloomy forecast about the pace of vaccination because of problems with the supplies with the AstraZeneca. But now it looks like Pfizer is increasing dramatically its production, and therefore more and more doses are coming on in May, in June, and July. So the problems of supplying enough doses is for the time being postponed. I myself may be vaccinated within the end of May, probably before I expected, because I expected to be vaccinated around mid-June to mid-July, but probably I will be vaccinated in less than 30 days. So I'm very glad about that, and so we are open again for people, for Italians to gather again and to go out, and I was missing a pizza, to tell you the truth myself. I was missing a pizza. So for the time being, we are not allowed to eat out at dinner, and we have to go back to home by 10 p.m. But we can eat out at lunch. If you want to take a coffee, you cannot drink it inside the bar, but you have to drink it outside. But that's a major improvement versus the situation we had before the 26th, when restaurants were closed and many activities were closed. Also, theaters and cinemas and show business is reopening again. This is a picture which has not been taken in Italy, but this is what's going on here. The movie theaters are open again with a limit of spectators, and but we are slowly going towards a kind of a sort of normality. So I myself like very much to go to the cinema, to the movie theaters, and I look forward to, I miss them very much. I miss my nights at the movie theaters, but I hope that I will I will probably go and see a movie next week. This week I could not, but next week I will surely do it, just for the sense of the feeling of going back away from home, going back to being back on the road again, and having some entertainment which is not television and that's television or listening to music at home. Okay, so slowly, obviously these measures will get better and better by the time we get into summer, and therefore we are quite optimistic that the worst is gone. Okay, a few words about the situation for American and Canadian tourists coming to Europe. The European President, Mrs. von der Leyen, talked to the New York Times a few days ago, saying that probably in summer Europe will be open for citizens, US and Canadian citizens who are vaccinated. That's good news. Let me tell you that our position about the position of Vitor, we decided to postpone the reopening of our activity. We are open right now for, let's say, tours which will take place starting September the 1st. Okay, we think that it's much safer, and we prefer not to organize tours also in a very crowded season when still there are some safety concerns, and maybe some operators could be not still not vaccinated. So our choice is to restart our activities, restart tours that take place from September the 1st. And let me tell you in a few words, we are organizing also guided tours, a couple of guided tours. The guided tours are we had. You see, this is a picture of our website. This is the guided tours 2021, but obviously not all of them are taking place. We chose two of them which are quite representative of our activities and of the country, and these are the Italy in 10 days guided tour, the second Milan, Cinque Terre, Florence and Rome, and the last one Authentic Italy guided grand tour south, Naples, Amalfi, Matera, Puglia in 12 days. This last in the south will take place in September, and the other tour will take place in October. Still, we are open for organizing any tours you might want to take starting September the 1st, the way we organized that when before the pandemic. Okay, let me present you very shortly the tour Authentic Italy, Grand Tour South. Next time I will talk about the 10 days tour in northern Italy. This tour will start in September 14th, and I'm very glad to tell you that I will be guiding this tour. I myself, I will be vaccinated, and so we are traveling in full safety. And obviously, given the very exceptional situation we are in, this tour needs a minimum of 4 people to start. But I really hope that I will gather 4 people to come with me and explore southern Italy, which is just gorgeous, just a part of the country which I love so much. And as you can see, this is the itinerary. We will start from Rome, then south to Naples and Lecce and Puglia, and then we will go back to Rome. And these are some pictures that you will also see on our website. You see, started from upper left, Alberobello, then below that that's Matera. That's then below it's Pompeii. In the center we have a view from Ravello on the Amalfi Coast, and a view of the fantastic octagonal castle in Andria. And then upper right we have Capri, then the temples, the Greek temples in Paestum, and the fantastic Castel Gandolfo on Lake Nemi, and much more, obviously much more on the way, and also not just for visiting these places much, but more activities. In Capri we will go by boat. We will take a full day excursion by boat. And there's going to be a visit to a masseria, a wine cellar, and obviously a couple of cooking classes. But you can find the program on our website, and also you can download the PDF. Okay, last note before starting with our story of tonight about Nero. Let me remind you that I'll be on Google Meet on May 3rd. That's next Monday, and this is the first of a series of meetings we are going to have on Google Meet, the first Monday of the month. Okay, same time, 3:30 p.m. East EST and 12:30 p.m. PST in North America. For our Asian friends from the Far East, we will have a meeting on the second Monday of the month, and every second Monday of the month, and obviously different times, because this is more in line with their time. And you can find here you can find the link for the meeting, and you can also find it on Facebook. And if you have any problem, just email me or try and contact me. That I will be very glad to help you. Okay, after this brief introduction, the subject, the character of tonight is Mr. Nero, okay? The Emperor Nero, the famous and infamous Emperor Nero, okay? But we will talk about Nero and also about the times of Nero. There's a lot to say. It's a very, very decisive time in the Roman history, and it marks the end of the dynasty, the Julius Claudius dynasty. And from now on, the history of Rome will take another turn. But okay, let me talk about Nero in general. Okay, so for thousands of years, Nero was truly the symbol of the insane, of the cruel despot. He was incestuous, matricidal, uxoricide, murder of venerable senators, of so many good people, fornicator, incendiary, the persecutor of Christians, and all of this is seasoned with a wild passion for music and poetry, and all the more ridiculous because he was completely devoid of talent. Okay, and for millions of people, this figure still has the inevitable look of the great actor Peter Ustinov in the movie Quo Vadis. Okay, Peter Ustinov created an unforgettable, ferocious, and whimpering Nero. Many of you will probably remember him as I remember him, as he squeals in an ungainly voice before the flames that devour Rome. So, Nero is the myth of the ogre in power. And yet, in analyzing the ancient sources, a curious contrast emerges. Because the Greek and Roman authors can't avoid a truly jarring contradiction. On the one hand, they tell us that the people celebrated the news of Nero's suicide with joy. But almost reluctantly, these same authors, they admit that ordinary people brought flowers to his tomb for a long time. It was a splendid porphyry sarcophagus surmounted by an altar of white marble. We also know that periodically portraits of Nero were exhibited in the middle of the Roman Forum and were offered to the devotion of the many who still regretted him. And more than that, Nero had some immediate and ephemeral successors. Okay, we'll see them in the next episode. So, but Otho and Vitellius, the year of year 69 after the death of the emperor is called the year of the four emperors, and you will see the story. You will hear the story in the next episode. Okay, and they proclaimed, the two of them, Otho and Vitellius, they proclaimed officially that they wanted to follow Nero's example. They tried evidently to gain some consensus, but it was not easy to replicate the missing prints, and therefore, noting the difference between the original and the imitation, someone called them little Neros. So, if someone planned to follow Nero's example, it seems evident that the widespread judgment about Nero was not so negative in those years. The demonic portrait of this emperor does not work at all. So many refused to accept that Nero had even died in June of the year 68, pierced by a sword at the age of 31. The popular fantasy dreamed that Nero was still alive and that sooner or later he would make a triumphant return to Rome. So, things like this only happen when there is a widespread expectation, when the regret for the missing hero is acute, when current events are disappointing, and when the emotions of the past bring nostalgia. And also, 3 revenant Neros showed up in the months following his death, especially in the East, prompting the crowd's enthusiasm. Okay, you see, they even gathered several followers, but of course they were unmasked and they were killed. But still half a century after Nero's death, an orator could testify that many wished for the return of the emperor. He wrote, "Even now everyone hopes that he is alive, and many believe that he really is." So, the contrast between Nero's demon portrait, described by ancient historians, and his popularity for a long time after his death is indeed a great challenge for modern historians. And probably we may think that the ancient authors give us an image too influenced by the opinion of the Senate and the ruling elites. But these opinions, the opinions that the Senate and the ruling elites had about the prince. They saw Nero as their enemy, and they took their revenge when he was not around anymore. And when Nero became emperor in 454, after the death of Claudius, you remember the death of Claudius is described in episode 8, so if you want to know more about how Nero became an emperor, go back to episode 8. And he became emperor in the year 54 AD, and he was just 17. He was a boy, okay? And he was strongly influenced by his mother, Agrippina, and by two significant figures, Afranius Burrus, the prefect of the Praetorius, and Lucius Annaeus Seneca, an intellectual and philosopher who had been his private master during the years of his childhood. Nero's debut, like Caligula's, was very positive, after all. It was the so-called Nero's 5-year period, Quinquennium Neronis, the 5-year period during which the prince ruled under the protective wing of Agrippina and under the influence of Seneca. Seneca was convinced that clemency was a heavenly virtue, which could purify humanity, and found a new era, a new golden age. And he wanted his pupil, the emperor, the new emperor, to be inspired by this principle. It was a utopia, but Nero took this utopia very seriously and began to rule as a good and moderate prince. And for 5 years it seemed that the dream of an empire ruled by an enlightened monarch, respectful of the prerogatives of the Senate, it could become a reality. However, the situation changed as Nero, becoming an adult, became more and more aware of his power. And already in 55, 1 year after the ascent to the throne, he had his half-brother Britannicus slaughtered, with Seneca and Burrus full support. And after about 5 years, Nero began to feel crushed between the personalities of his mother and of his mentor. And she, Agrippina, as an ancient writer says, she had wanted Nero on the throne but did not want him to rule. And Seneca, he demanded that Stoic philosophy rule. To become a man, to become a true emperor, and to begin to rule in his own way, Nero had to get rid of his guardians, his two guardians. And he did it. So, after 5 years, his, let's say, criminal career began. It's impossible to make a list, a complete list of crimes, of the crimes that are attributed to Nero, rightly or not. As with Caligula, no other hypothesis than madness can explain such reactions. But we have already talked about the relationship between pathology and domination, and we will come back to it later on. Nero was married to Octavia, the daughter of Claudius. She was a devoted girl. But in 58, he fell in love with the Poppaea Sabina. This is Seneca, and this is Poppaea Sabina. Poppaea Sabina, a magnificent woman with the amber-colored hair. And she was married, and her husband, Marcus Salvius Otho, the future emperor, he was sent to Lusitania to get rid of him, okay? And Lusitania is present-day Portugal, as governor. And Nero hated Octavia because she had been imposed to him on him by his mother. And first he repudiated her, then he had her killed. And as to Agrippina, she had hoped to rule through her son. And at the beginning of Nero's rule, she had got rid of her last rival, the powerful Libertus Narcissus, one of Claudius' Liberti. But after Nero had killed, had Britannicus killed, Agrippina realized that her life was in danger because her son was getting mad. He was capable of anything. And so Nero ordered her to be removed from the palace, and as his mother opposed his relationship with Poppaea, Nero became convinced that Agrippina was plotting against him and that she had to be eliminated. So, Tacitus, the great historian, writes that first Nero thought of poisoning Agrippina, but after the poisoning of Britannicus, her death would not look so accidental. So then he resorted to a ruse, okay? He invited her to the seaside resort of Baia, where he was to celebrate Minerva's festivities, making her believe that he wanted to reconcile with her. And after the banquet, Agrippina's ship returned home. But above Agrippina's bed on the ship, a massive load of lead had been amassed on the roof. And at the given signal, the top of the cabin collapsed and weighed down by the lead, of course. But Agrippina was saved by the high headboards of the bed. They were strong enough to withstand the weight. And this is funny. Tacitus recounts that Nero was terrified, so afraid of Agrippina's revenge. He consulted with Seneca and Burro, and finally he gave the order, kill his mother, once and for all. And when Agrippina saw the door of her room smashed and the hitmen appeared, she turned to them and she said, "Hit the belly that generated Nero." And who knows what were the feelings, the thoughts of this woman in seeing herself pressed by the assassins sent by a son to whom she had sacrificed her whole life. It was March 23rd, 59 AD. Trials and convictions based on false accusations resumed. And later, as some senators led by Traseapeto, they had spoken openly against Nero. And Nero accused them of a conspiracy, and finally he indulged in a bloodbath. Claudius had left the state treasure in excellent conditions, but Nero's expenditures had depleted it. So, a solution very easy. He forced the condemned to leave him their goods. Seneca criticized these measures and was kindly invited to retire. And so he did to his villa in Campania. But, well, probably the real reason why he lost his job was that he also criticized his masters, his Nero's poems. The last tutor of Annus Burrus died in 62, and he was replaced by Ophonius Tigellinus, who since then was ready to encourage and favor every crime of the emperor. In the end, it looked like Caligula had reincarnated in Nero. The contempt for the senatorial order, the privileged relationship with the urban plebs, flattered by the magnificence of shows and parties, and in Nero's case, by his readiness to perform in public. He looked for the people's approval through entertainment. Now, the princeps, as Augustus had presented himself as the supreme magistrate of the Republic, it gave way to a monarch with absolute powers, the typical kind of government in the Hellenistic East. Nero seemed, and this is a picture of Nero contemplating the body of his mother, his dead mother. So Nero seemed crazy, but we have already seen with Caligula how delicate and complex the theme of crazy emperors is. Even in this case, we can only say that a mixture of omnipotence and fragility, which characterized the position of many Roman emperors, could easily alter the most unstable and immature personalities, as Nero's and as Caligula's. Okay, this is a picture of a diorama with the Circus Maximus, and on the left the imperial palace. So Nero was very ambitious and was obviously very sensitive to popularity, and he won the support of the people by organizing distributions of wheat, and again competitions and shows of all kinds. He deeply loved Greek culture, music, and theater in particular. And he presented himself as a kind of Apollo, the god who played the harp, who came down to earth to spread beauty, poetry among men. Nero looked at Greece, and Greek culture implied the concept of competition, and Nero wanted to compete. He prepared manically, and he took the races very seriously, and the judges obviously always made him win, but he was really a passionate participant, and the masses loved him. Nero's artistic career is inevitably linked to one of the most severe disasters suffered by the city of Rome in its history of about 3,000 years. It's the fire that broke out on the terrible night of July 18th, 64 AD. A fire that started in the area of the Circus Maximus that we have seen in the last previous slide. It was the Casbah of the city. And for some time, Nero had planned to build a new golden palace for himself, his own temple. The size he had in mind was just gigantic, and he could not find a suitable building area in the crowded center of Rome. To Nero, to him, the city was poorly built and should be redone from scratch with a more rational urban plan. It was a hot and windy night, as they can be hot in Rome. If you've been in Rome in July, you can have real hot nights, hot and humid. And flames spread with impressive speed. Tacitus says the flames were faster than those who tried to put them out. Rome was mainly a wooden city. Houses were leaning against each other, narrow alleys, and it burned quickly. Firefighting systems obviously did not exist. The fire brigade was there. Yes, there was a brigade, but it could not be effective in situations like this, a massive fire. And when the fire was extinguished after 20 days, the toll was terrible. Tacitus writes that of the 14 districts in which Rome was divided, only 4 remained intact. 3 had been razed to the ground, and in the remaining 7 there were only a few wrecks of delanched and half-burnt houses. So, Nero's enemies spread the word that the emperor had set the fire because he wanted to have fun and draw inspiration by singing the fire of Troy while contemplating the fire on the Capitol from the top of his palace. It was also said that he wanted to burn the city to build a more beautiful one, with a new name, Neropolis, the city of Nero, of course. The emperor was in Anzio at the time, and when he knew about the fire, he immediately came to Rome, and in the rescue work he showed an energy that no one suspected him of having. But the question stands, had he really ordered the fire? The accusation was unfounded. The elements which exonerate Nero are numerous and essential, although many modern historians still did not want to consider them. And probably they were seduced by the ancient tales and by the demonic myth of Nero. But the fact that the people's voice immediately accused him shows that the people considered him capable of doing so. And the accusation was insidious because these masses had been afflicted by an evil too big and sudden, and they wanted an explanation. They wanted to understand why this happened right away, right now. They needed a culprit. And Nero obviously did not want to be this culprit. So strangely, this time he did not react to accusations. He did not even persecute the authors of the leaflets. There were leaflets around accusing him, pointing at him, and raising the popular fury against him. And instead, Nero acted very calmly, and he accused a religious sect which had formed in that time in Rome, and which derived from its name from Jesus Christ, a Jew condemned to death by the governor Pontius Pilate in Palestine at the time of Tiberius. Nero knew nothing about them. And when he had ordered that every member of the sect be arrested, and after a short trial, they were convicted. Tacitus writes, they were covered with wild animal skins to be mauled by dogs, crucified, or burnt alive as torches to serve as night lightning in the dark Roman nights. In this way, Nero, who was also a matricide and an uxoricide, he became the first of the persecutors of the Christians. Nero's cruelty was such that it discredited him even more. Ordinary people felt pity for the followers of that religion, despite the fact that they had a bad reputation and they were very unpopular. It was in this persecution that Peter and Paul, the two prominent leaders of the Christian community, who they happened to be in town at the same time, and they both died. The circumstance will help to make Nero the personification of the Antichrist. Paul was a Roman citizen, and as such he was entitled to some regard, and in fact they merely beheaded him. And Peter instead found himself mixed with the other Christians, and he was killed in the place that would later become the seat of Christianity, Vatican Hill. And Peter was also the protagonist of a famous episode to which a small church is dedicated, erected in the 9th century, at the intersection of Via Appia and Via Ardeatina, on the outskirts of Rome. The Christian community, fearing for the capture and the killing of Peter, its leader, had organized Peter's escape along the Via Appia. And tradition has it that when the apostle came to the intersection of the Via Appia with the Via Ardeatina, a person came towards him. And in shock, Peter recognized Jesus. Quo vadis, Domine? Lord, where are you going? The apostle asked. Eo Romam iterum crucifigi. I go to Rome to be crucified again. Jesus replied. And Peter understood that Jesus, with this sign, he asked him to return to Rome and to accept martyrdom. And he obeyed. He will be crucified, as he had asked, upside down, not feeling worthy to die in the same way as the Master. And this is the fantastic picture dedicated to the crucifixion of Peter by Michelangelo Merisi di Caravaggio. It's in the church of Santa Maria del Popolo, in Piazza del Popolo, in Rome, the chapel of Cerasi. And I had the chance to see it last year, and I still remember feeling very, very emotional, very moved about this masterpiece. It's just absolutely genius, and absolute technique, and absolute knowledge, and absolute mastery of light, of colors. Fantastic. So, apart from a mention of Jesus by the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, the tale of the Neronian persecution is the first historical testimony of a non-Christian text on the spread of Christianity from Judea to Rome. But how many adepts had Christianity in Rome by the time of the persecution of Nero? Obviously, we have no figures, but there were probably a few thousand at most. The very fact that the authorities paid little attention to them confirms it. Christians joined in ecclesia, that is, churches or congregations that had nothing secret and conspiratorial in those early times. There was no shadow of secrecy and whoever showed up was greeted without suspicion or mistrust. People came from all social classes, rich and poor, free men, as well as liberty and slaves, artisans, patricians and equites, who financed the communities. The only difference was between the urban population and country villagers. The first adepts came from the city, for obvious reasons. Only in the town they could gather assiduously, because the minds were more open to criticism, as in the countryside, the traditions and customs are preserved for a longer time, and peasants are in general more conservative. And that's why Christians became to call the unbelievers pagans, that is, peasants, from pagus, which meant village in Latin. These forerunners aimed at the establishing of a healthy and gracious model of life. And this was the right answer to the request for more decency, for more honesty, for more brotherhood that was coming from a broader range of the population of the Roman society. They were living in a capital that was becoming increasingly unhealthy, morally, and shameless. And this religion, Christianity, was no longer limited to an elected people, as Judaism, or to a social class, such as paganism in Greece and Rome, which considered their faith a monopoly of their citizens. It's the moral level and the great hope that Christianity opened in the hearts and minds and of men, and the missionary impetus of these adepts conquered people of all origins and all classes, and very quickly. And this speed makes us understand how empty the religious life of Rome was. It was all form and no content. People could no longer adhere to the old empty faith of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. So, at that time, the massacres seemed to have destroyed the sect forever. But like all massacres, it turned out to be a fertilizer and a spreader of the Christian faith across the empire. Now back to our character, Nero. He could now devote himself to the reconstruction of the city as he liked, and of his palace in particular. So, generally speaking, adequate measures were taken to facilitate reconstruction and prevent such disastrous events from happening again. The roads were widened and tracked regularly. The height of the buildings was limited. Arcades were opened. Open space were left to avoid the easy spread of fire. The use of non-flammable stones instead of wood was prescribed. Nero took advantage of the disaster and occupied an immense area from the Palatine, the Palatinum, to the Esquiline. And here he built a palace that, for his luxury, took the name of Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It was to be the largest and most impressive imperial residence ever built in the empire's capital. The complex extended on about 80 hectares in the heart of Rome, a third of Central Park in New York, as a comparison. A palace of about 150 rooms. It had triple-order arcades of columns, a mile long, 1,478 meters, 1 Roman mile. And the pond you see up in upper right, that looked like the sea, and surrounded by so many buildings that it looked like a city on the sea. And the ceilings were very high. On the walls there were gold ornaments, and in the vestibule stood the famous, you can see in the center, Colossus of Nero, the gigantic statue of about 35 meters, representing him as a deity that will give his name to the Colosseum. In fact, the Colosseum was called this way not because it is a colossal, but because it was close to the Colossus of Nero. And inside the Domus Aurea there were fields, vineyards, pastures, woods, wild animals wandering freely. Some sources even tell that the bathroom you may find seawater and water of thermal origin. And the fulcrum of the Neronian palace was undoubtedly the octagonal hall complex. It was covered with a pavilion, dome of in opus cementitium, that is cement, concrete, with an oculus on the top. It was surrounded by an infeum. It was preceded by a staircase from which water flowed, refreshing the environment. And in this vast and gloomy space, there was a spectacular banquet hall, of which the sources speak, a place where the architects, machinatores, that is, inventors of mechanical devices, they were Severus, their name was Severus and Celerus. They had placed a wooden structure that rotated slowly thanks to complex hydraulic mechanism, and that, like the word, made a complete tour in 24 hours. And this is a picture of how it could be, it could show itself in those times. It's not clear if the floor revolves or the roof revolves, but historians of those times said that it revolved in precisely in 24 hours. And Nero, identified as with the sun, he sat in its center while flower petals rained down from above and scents were poured. These descriptions have come to us thanks to the testimony of Suetonius. He tells us that at the time of the inauguration, Nero exclaimed, "Well, at last I can begin to live like a human being." Throughout the structure, the exaltation of Nero as the absolute monarch was evident. His colossal statue showed his superiority over the rest of humanity. The main banquet hall, at the center of which was the prince, was the image of the entire universe, which revolves around the sovereign, the emperor, a god on earth. And after his death, Nero and his golden house were struck by. But where is the Domus Aurea? Okay. Oh, where can I find the Domus Aurea? In Rome, you may say. Okay. Well, after this death, Nero and his golden house were struck by the damnatio memoriae, meaning the condemnation of memory. A large portion of the Domus Aurea was destroyed to construct the baths of Titus and later of Trajan. And Vespasian ordered that the vast pond be drained. You remember the pond? Okay. Here. The pond be drained and returned to the Roman people. And in this place, the founder of the Flavian dynasty, Vespasianus, had his famous amphitheater erected, while the face of the Colossus of Nero was modified to represent the god sun. Okay, so where is the Domus Aurea? Where is the Stadium? The Stadium is in the area of the Colosseum. And so you can see that how huge it was in this map, how huge it was, the Domus Aurea. And a strange thing happened. Okay. And it was the construction of the baths, Titus first and then Trajan's, above the Domus Aurea that allowed his preservation throughout the centuries. The Neronian house was buried entirely to form the foundation for subsequent structure. And in its large rooms, the walls of the new buildings were erected, and they can still be distinguished clearly from the original ones. And after the burial, only some of the openings so these are pictures of the underground structure. The Domus Aurea is underground, okay? And to visit it, you have to book in advance. And only some of the openings that Nero had built on the ceilings were visible on the outside. And through these cracks, at the end of the 15th century, some enthusiasts of antiquities and some curious explorers began to descend into these large underground spaces. And after 14 centuries, the domus came back to life, showing its extraordinary pictorial works on ceilings and walls in the dark. And after centuries of neglect, these ancient frescoes buried under the city, they appeared to Renaissance artists as caves. And from these grottos, the famous grotto style, stile grottesco, it originated at the end of the 15th century. And precisely because it aimed at imitating these ancient frescoes, monstrous and colorful beings or extravagant animals, wall geometric, imaginative decorations of the walls, symmetrical, in a monochrome background, white. And great Renaissance artists such as Raphael, Ghirlandaio, Pittoricchio, and many others explore the underground presences of Domus Aurea to study its magnificent decorations and draw inspiration from them. So, you see, this is a ceiling of Villa Madama. Villa Madama is a villa built in the 16th century for Cardinal Dalvero, who was a minister of the Pope, and is now a property of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And you see the inspiration from the grottos is evident. And unfortunately, you cannot visit it. It's closed to the public. So, with no more breaks, Nero is gone. He's completely crazy. And he saw no limits to his wishes. And in 65, Poppaea died of an abortion. And many thought that her husband had kicked her in the belly during an argument. And this is a picture of a possible what happened.
And but for Nero, the blow was terrible. He lost both a wife and a heir, and he will keep her memory alive, and he will have her proclaimed diva, goddess. And while the emperor oversaw the work for the erection of his grand palace, his spies uncovered another plot, involving as many as 40 people, led by the noble senator Gaius Calpurnius Piso. And Tigellinus, the prefect of Pretorius, was given free rein in the search for conspirator. And there were the usual arrests and confessions. And in one of these, the names of various intellectuals were included, and also Seneca's name was made, Nero's old master, you remember? And Seneca learned that he had participated in the conspiracy of Piso from the emperor envoys who came to Campania, to his villa, to announce his conviction. This is a picture of the death of Seneca by Jean-Claude by David, the French printer. And so when death presented itself at Seneca's door, he objected to this ambassador that there was no reason to convict him, because he had not been in politics for a long time, and he only cared for his wealth, for his health. And the ambassadors returned to Rome, but Nero was adamant. And so Seneca, very calmly, he embraced his wife Pauline. He wrote a farewell letter to the Romans. He drank the hemlock, as Socrates had done 465 years before him, and he opened his veins with a knife. He died according to the precept of Stoicism, better than he had lived. And the centuries have erased the contradictions of the man and have preserved only the works of the writer, in which he teaches how to achieve happiness by overcoming passions. Luxuries and megalomania drained the state finances. Nero's love for construction was very, very expensive, and he also used gold and silver from the state treasury to pay for luxury imports from India, and even from as far as from the Far East. And he had to devalue the currency coin by reducing the weight of the gold coins. And he resorted to, as Caligula had done to the confiscation of rich assets, putting its owners to death under various pretexts. And also Nero was not interested in the actual management of the government, and this aggravated the situation. And between 66 and 67, he took a long journey to Greece, where he said that the people there understood art more than in Rome. And the Greeks, they understood, they were cute, they understood the antiphon. They had him win all the tournaments and races, even those in which he did not even participate. And they awarded him 1,808 prizes in the various games. And they organized a resounding clock in the theaters where the emperor sang. And he even won a chariot race in which he fell from the chariot. And in response, Nero proclaimed Greece freedom. Actually, it was a broad tax exemption, digging a further hole in the state accounts, unfortunately. And so we are almost at the end of our infamous story of Nero. His fame plummeted in the year 68, the 14th year of his reign. And the contrast between him and the Senate became irremediable. And the masses adored him, and the senators loathed him. And his passions apparently were harmless, singing and driving chariots in the circus. And they did not hurt anyone, but the majority of senators saw them as a potential threat. The further the emperor moved away from their way of life, the more he took an anti-traditional behavior, the more he appeared to be a threat to the state, an uncontrollable despot who hurt tradition and mos maiorum, the very foundation of Rome. And besides, the state had several severe financial problems due to the Nero's love for luxury, and also the expenditures needed for the reconstruction of the city. So the provinces were in turmoil, and the first revolt broke out in Gaul. Here the governor Julius Vindex called Gaul to arms against the emperor. But Nero lived in his crazy world. While his generals organized the army he would lead against the rebels, he ordered a large number of wagons built explicitly for the transport of the scenes with which to mount a theater. Between the battles he intended to act, play, and sing, and the soldiers would be his public now. And Vindex was defeated by other legions in the area and killed, but meanwhile the Spanish legions acclaimed their commander Galba as emperor. And also he received the support of the governor of Lusitania, Otho, you remember, Poppaea's husband. And together they marched towards Rome. Nero oscillated between carelessness and the announcement of strict measures to deal with the crisis. But the story was over. Sabinus, the prefect of the Praetorians, had already entered into negotiations with the Senate, and the Praetorians were convinced with the promise on Galba's behalf of 30,000 sesterzi for each guard. It was a fortune, and this was the sign of Nero's ruin. The Senate was the Senate was the shadow of that forum of patres that had guided the Roman state to the conquest of the world. And now the Senate recovered a little courage, proclaimed Galba emperor, and declared Nero a public enemy. Public enemy was a terrible expression by which Nero would be abandoned to the worst acts of revenge, to the worst humiliation. And now Nero was an ex-emperor. And he hid inside a friend's villa on the Via Salaria, 10 kilometers from the city. He was terrified. He grabbed a dagger to plunge it into his chest, but his hand trembled, and it was his secretary Epaphroditus who killed him. And he is said to have whispered in a rattle, "Ah, what an artist dies with me." But Galba's guards respected the corpse, and the body was buried pitifully, and thus ended the great dynasty founded by Augustus. So, how will we remember Nero? How are we remembering Nero? Nero is being remembered as a ruler who did not have a sense of the limit. I called him the emperor without limits. But it's this lack of constraints, Nero looked forward without the conditioning of the past that Romans had. And it was this which made him so popular. And so popular that many Romans continued to believe that he had not died and he was to return. And there's a last tale, an extraordinary tale, which perhaps says it all about Nero's positive myth. In Greece, in the Argolic region, there was a very deep lake, Lake Alsonius, which was said to lead directly to the underworld. And to certify the impossibility of measuring its depth, Pausanias, who writes in the 2nd century AD, simply comes to say it is impossible because not even Nero could do it. Okay, that's all for tonight. I hope I was able to entertain you with the history of Nero. Thank you for your attention. I'll see you in 2 weeks with another episode of the Roman history. We'll talk about the Flavians, Emperor Vespasianus, and his sons Titus and Domitianus, and we'll also talk about the games, the meaning and the importance of games in ancient Rome. And don't forget, next Monday, May 3rd, next same time, meet on Google Meet and for talk about whatever you want to talk about. Okay, and I look forward to seeing you face to face in a few days. Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to tell you this story, and I look forward to meeting you once again. Bye bye. Have a nice weekend. Thank you. Bye bye. Ciao. Ciao.